Hello, welcome. We're gonna try and move forward, and I hope you all had a good lunch. It was fabulous. We're doing our best to bring better quality food to an institutional environment. So thank you. We're gonna continue on with what has been an exciting and conference so far. Symposium, and we're going to do two things. First of all, we're going to move to one moderator, and I've asked the moderators to really be somewhat aggressive in asking questions and pushing, and we're going to try and really get to the heart of some of these issues. So I think that's going to be exciting. So if you see a slight difference in moderation this afternoon, blame it on me. But I think it'll allow us to get things really clarified, which is, I know, what a lot of us want. I also have been asked to announce that we are live webcasting this conference, as many of you know. For those of you who are here and want to watch it again, it will be available, I think, on our website. I think we'll have the documents on Saturday. I don't know if it'll be up on Saturday or Monday, but we'll get it up as soon as we can. And you can come back and rewatch the conference. So we have two panels this afternoon, one on this first one on farming, both animal and plant farming, and then the second one on human medicine. It should be a great afternoon. My colleague, Gabriel Perrone, is going to moderate this panel, and I'll turn it over to him. Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. Me again. So thank you for being here this afternoon. So I'm very excited about this panel, just like the other ones. You'll see, hopefully, we're going to hear a lot of... We were asking about solutions this morning. I think we're going to hear a lot about them right now. But before we get started with the introduction, I would like to start by introducing Belinda Thomas and ask her to... Thompson, sorry. And to ask you maybe to introduce yourself, but maybe the concept behind the symposium today a little bit. So if you could tell us the story about your involvement with the idea of microbiome and health, and see how we came to be here today a little bit.
Okay, so that's a big tell that I didn't know was going to be asked. So a lot of you in the audience have heard the name Sandy Lewis thrown around, and most of you don't know who he is. So he's a farmer with cows, but he was also a wealthy financier. So if you Google his name, you will find a story about him going to prison and being pardoned by Bill Clinton. But he's a farmer in New York State as well, and he has cows. And his herd of cows introduced an infectious disease to the herd by buying some cattle, and he had cattle dying. And they were dying from an unknown reason. And I'm a faculty member at Cornell in the veterinary college. I'm a large animal veterinarian. I was in practice for 20 years. And I work in the diagnostic lab helping veterinarians with difficult diagnostic problems. And parts of a dead animal were coming in, as well as two very, very sick animals that were supposed to be arriving on a trailer who ultimately arrived dead on arrival. They didn't survive the trip. And it was my job to help find out why the animals died and to help the veterinarian for the herd solve the problem. And the problem was a contagious bacterial disease that is relatively non-existent in the Northeast, but when we get it here, it can be spread. And there are a variety of measures to control it, including the administration of antibiotics or the culling of infected animals to remove them as a threat to the remainder of the herd. And we used both antibiotics and culling to eliminate the problem on the farm. One of the things that we did was we treated sick animals individually rather than treating the entire herd as a whole. And Sandy Lewis was impressed by that I recommended that for his herd. His herd was certified organic at the time. It is no longer an organic herd. He could not have treated his animals with antibiotics to save their lives if he had remained organic. The antibiotics that were used a while ago. They quickly leave the system of the animal. Whether or not they create antimicrobial resistance in the microbiome, I don't think we really know. And Sandy Lewis, I'm sure he's listening. Hi, Sandy. strongly believes that the decision to treat the animals by using injectable antibiotics rather than oral antibiotics in the feed was also another measure to protect the microbiome. I don't have enough information to know whether I agree with that. I do know that I agree that the gut has a good blood supply and that when we give antibiotics by any means, they are likely to get to the gut. There may be more damage done by oral antibiotics than by injectable antibiotics. But at the very least, we were very selective in the number of animals that were exposed to antibiotics. And if animals were already destined for slaughter, they weren't treated with antibiotics. They were just removed from the herd. So that's how I got involved, and that's why I'm here today. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a microbiome specialist. I am a caretaker of livestock, and I am also an educator of the next generation of veterinary students. So I also teach about judicious use of antimicrobials. I don't believe we should take antibiotics off farms, so I probably don't represent the common belief in the room. I believe that we are very privileged that we're all sitting here today and we're not home hoeing weeds and milking cows. It used to be everybody in this country had to produce their own food or had to have a really good friend. And now only 2% of us produce food, some of whom are in this room. And the work they do is hard, and they don't get enough pay for it, and they are not price setters, they are price takers. The food producers are told what they will be paid for their food. And while it's great if Whole Foods and other chains, organic food chains can pay a premium for their foods, and in fact that does have an influence on the market, most of the people in this country can't afford that. Realistically, we are all privileged to be able to afford the food that 2% of the population makes for us. I do believe that if somebody has an animal that's sick and they want to treat it, they should be allowed to treat it. And I think that's an animal welfare issue, that when animals are sick, if they are suffering, the suffering needs to end, and it either needs to end with animal treatment or with euthanasia, and that allowing animals to suffer is not appropriate. So Sandy's herd is no longer organic. It is grass-fed, and his animals are raised with concern for their animal welfare, and that's a significant thing for livestock producers, and that was always my goal as a livestock veterinarian, to be the advocate for the animal in the system. And certainly, I would say that many of our livestock systems are not health-friendly. I try not to use or misuse the word industrial farming or the words factory farming, because in my life as a large animal practitioner, one of the things I've seen with some farms that have gotten bigger is that some of the facilities have been improved, some of the diets have been improved, and the training of the staff has improved, and they're actually better able to take care of animals. Sandy would not be called a small farmer conventionally in New York State. He has beef cows, and he has had between 300 and 500 beef cows. That's a really big cow-calf herd for New York State. There's a lot of 30 cow-calf herds. He has a full-time herdsman. Sandy doesn't clean up after his cows. Hi, Sandy. Paul cleans up after his cows. He has a crew. So, we need to keep some of the things that we say in perspective, and that's the perspective that I bring to this.
Thank you so much. I think it speaks for a lot of people here. That's the point of the conference, is to actually have this discussion. Sometimes in the 80s and the 90s, the organic movement really started picking up and people went one way. It's all about being rational here and having a discussion. And like, how can we use these things in the most rational, efficient way for everyone involved, including animal health? So I hope we have good discussion here. So without any further ado, I would like for our panelists to introduce themselves. So if you could just, say who you are, and also was maybe something you'd like us to know about your practice or your involvement here.
Hi, I'm Kevin Ferry, and I've spent my career studying some microbiome, but it's a little bit different. It's aquaponics and aquaculture, and if anybody has any questions or want to talk a little bit about that, we can. Also, quite a bit of experience with heritage breed animals, from cattle to pigs to sheep, all different breeds, and how we've used and not used antibiotics in situations where there's been a welfare situation, but really trying to control herd size, surface area of pasture to animal, and really try to address these issues that way. Currently here in Tivoli, and we're farming and using a lot of these practices here in Tivoli.
I'm Ben Shute, and I am an owner and the manager of Hardy Roots Farm. We're just a few miles away in Claremont. And I'm a first-generation farmer. Started our farm 16 years ago on rented land, even closer to here in Red Hook, and then have since, between bouncing around to different rented properties, we're now on our own 70 acres producing vegetables, primarily organic vegetables. Also have chickens for eggs. We have about 1,500 laying hens who are pasture-raised laying hens, and a few pigs. Most of our sales are direct marketed to customers around here in the Hudson Valley in New York City through CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. And yes, so just a kind of a quick reason for being here. I don't certainly consider myself an expert in the microbiome or in the science, but depend very heavily on it in my work as a farmer. And as someone who's like 16 years into their farming career, but has another maybe 30 to go, my goal is definitely to try and make my life easier every year. And the more that the soil life, that my animals' health can take care of some of that work for me, as my knees get weaker, if my soil life and the microbiome on my farm gets stronger, then that's going to make my life easier, my farm more resilient, my community stronger. I'm a first-generation farmer, so you could also argue I'm not even an expert in farming compared to maybe people who have been at it longer or who are multi-generational. But I do want to point out that I think there's a really interesting and compelling thing that happens with new farmers, which is that they're not tied into their family business the way that they've done things for generations, the systems that were set up when they arrived. New farmers have the freedom to do things differently and to change practices and to experiment. And so I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity in that. And with my wife, Lindsay, I'm also a co-founder of the National Young Farmers Coalition, and have been exposed to many, many new and beginning farmers and seen a lot of exciting, hopeful things happening in terms of opportunity for making improvements in how we farm and coming up with new ideas. So,
my name is Kyle Jaster. I went to Bard, graduated in 2005, built a couple relatively successful technology companies in New York City, and then about 5 years ago came to the conclusion I wanted to be working to help more successful small farms come into fruition. And in the course of that, I decided it made sense for me to focus on, to kind of do some research and actually build a successful small-scale farm. So I'm in my fourth season of doing that. I raise heritage pigs in the woods, in the Catskills, about 45 minutes west of here. I work with Stonehouse Grain, which is a local grain company that's moving towards regenerative organic for all of their 2,200 acres. And have a no soy pig pork product, and I have used medicine when I've had to for pigs, so they're not organic, but they're otherwise raised in I think what is the best way that I know how. So I'm really excited to hear what other people are doing, and I'm very happy to share kind of the things that I've learned in the process of going from nothing to selling pork to some of the better restaurants in the area.
Go ahead.
I'm Ted Dupmeyer. I bring welcome to you from Canada, and I am honored to speak to each of you, and so we'll welcome the questions. My wife Darlene is with me. We toured down yesterday. Really enjoy your countryside. My interests are for sure the use of antibiotics. I have been in the business long enough to see chloramphenicol become totally resistant to all bacteria that we could deal with. I've seen a resistance to bacteria in my daughter's case just in the past year. I've been fortunate enough to work with Dr. Huber and Dr. Dunham with the glyphosate/Roundup situation in Canada. We no doubt will talk a great deal about that, as Roundup, Don has mentioned, is a registered antibiotic. We put it on the ground by pounds, and in Canada we use a stronger preparation than what you do, and so I have numerous cases. I've bored these poor fellows with it for ages. Go ahead, Art.
I'm Art Dunham. I'm a large animal practitioner from northeast Iowa, the little Switzerland of Iowa. And I work mainly with conventional non-organic farms. I do have one organic client, and I do have a son on my home 80 that's a MOSA certified vegetable farmer. But pretty much agree with most of what Belinda said. I guess I'm agonizing because of what glyphosate does to our soil. We want to talk about positive things. Well, just photosynthesis with non-Roundup corn, you have the possibility of raising your soil organic matter by 0.5% a year. And Iowa State University agronomists say that corn and soybean farmers, and that's mainly what Iowa is now, just corn and soybean farms, and even if they do everything right and plant cereal rye as a cover crop, usually in the spring they spray it dead with glyphosate before they plant the next crop. But anyway, they say we can't expect them to raise soil organic matter over 0.1% a year. Well, the best kept secret, we've got all sorts of good high corn suitability rating soils in Iowa now that are down to 2% organic matter. And if you're at 2% organic matter, you can only hold 0.5 inch of rain an hour. So you're hearing about all these floods in the Midwest now. Floods used to be a spring phenomenon when the ground was frozen and you had snow and ice melt. Well, now we're getting it in the summertime because your soil doesn't act as a sponge, so it can't hold water for either a drought or a flood. So the best kept secret, if every farmer in the world, and we can't expect people in the sand of Saudi Arabia, we're blessed with the best soil in the world yet in the Midwest, especially my Iowa. If every farmer in the world on the land we till or grow row crops on today raised their soil organic matter by 2%, that would store an amount of carbon dioxide equivalent to all that's been generated by mankind in the last 100 years. And that would also hold another 6 to 8 inches of water for both floods and drought. So we need some changes.
That's great. I mean, I think that's very promising for what we want to talk about, many of the practices and solutions we have. So maybe just before moving forward, I would like to ask all of you a question. We're going to hear about One Health tomorrow, a little later today, I think. So the idea of integrating veterinary sciences and the environment and all the practices that we do becomes more and more important. I think for a lot of people, though, farming and agriculture is something that we feel is this bucolic idea. It's something that we like to think is like not necessarily the way we think it is, but we like to have a grasp about it. So I would like to ask you, is there something about the ag or the food system that you would like your customers or your doctors to know about? So something you think could change the way we see our food system or our food industry that could potentially help us understand some of the practices that you are putting in places. And both from the farming point of view and also from a veterinary sciences point of view, that would be great to hear. Anyone wants to start?
I'm happy to start. I think there's a misconception that all livestock species eat antibiotics all the time unless they come from an organic farm. That's not true. Certainly, antibiotics have been used in this country, and they have been fed to whole herds of animals, and they have been used for growth promotion purposes. For the most part, that's done. Starting in 2017, a law was passed restricting the use of antibiotics entirely from using them for growth promotion purposes and putting the prescription dispensing of antibiotics into feeds into the hands of veterinarians. And it was actually something that large animal veterinarians have been hoping for. Antibiotics have been sold over the counter for livestock production in this country for a long time, and that's not been the case in human medicine, in human pharmaceuticals. It is the case in human pharmaceuticals in large parts of the world. And some of those parts of the world are the parts that showed up on Alistair's maps as having been production things. And I do know there's probably people in the audience who have been out of the country and have purchased antibiotics over the counter. I have friends who say that every time they travel, they take advantage of that and buy antibiotics and bring them home so they don't have to call a doctor if they get sick. So, that's something we want to stop in human medicine and in veterinary medicine. And I look forward to the day when all antibiotics are controlled by prescription only. That's one of my own personal biases. Another thing I want to tell you about cattle, at the very least, is if you were here this morning, you heard about the microbiome. I started my very first animal science class in September of 1973, and I learned how to feed not cattle. I learned how to feed the microbiome of the cattle. I learned how to feed the rumen. So everybody in large animal medicine understood that concept then. We understood that it wasn't the cows that digested the food. It was their microbiome. And we learned that we had to respect that microbiome. We made mistakes. We're going to continue to make mistakes. We have to learn from our mistakes and we have to move forward. But actually, we were a little bit further ahead than people gave us credit for, and I hope you'll take that away as a parting message.
I think if there's one thing you can do, it's learn how to cook. Yeah, and if you know how to cook, then cook more. And if you know how to cook and you cook more, then cook food from farms that you can visit. I think if you do those three things, basically, most of what we're talking about gets solved.
Okay, I'll go next on that. I guess I will take a little different angle on this. As veterinarians, we have been handed a responsibility, which we as veterinarians will definitely carry. And that is, at the present time, 85% of the antibiotics used in North America are used in livestock. That number will be changed. 2% is used in small animals, and 13, or anybody can figure it out, 13% is used in humans. And so, as Dr. Thompson has mentioned, the restrictions or the prescription system is in place now. As a veterinarian in Canada, I'm not really familiar with your rules in the US, but I'm sure they're near the same. No antibiotics can be used as growth promotants, as we discussed. No antibiotics can go into livestock of any type without a prescription from a veterinarian. And this is a major change. This all came into effect the middle of last December. Has been quite a difference in our livestock industry. The big plus is that the livestock industry is accepting this 100% because they know about the consumers. Now, one other positive that I'm going to mention before we move on is we talked about how people will vote with their dollar. And you heard about that from Arden before. In Canada, over the last 3 years, we've had a real war about whether Roundup was a problem or it wasn't a problem. Everybody was pretty well down on Don and I as saying it was an antibiotic and it was a problem. Farmers were pretty upset. Lo and behold, the Italians closed our market for lentils. Lo and behold, Quaker Oats said we will not buy oats that have been burnt down with Roundup. And you know what's happened? These products don't get very much Roundup anymore. That's how fast. That's within a year. So if anybody in this room is thinking that there can't be changes, there can be changes. But you know where it hits is the pocketbook. But producers are 100% behind, and you'll see the same in the U.S. as we see in Canada with the prescription and the control of antibiotics.
To maybe add just a little to that, our Englishman in his graph to make sure, since we've been talking about Roundup being it's actually an antimicrobial, we should call it that instead of antibiotic, but that's nitpicking. And it's also an antiparasitical. So it's actually, if you read how many people, if you prepared for this or read what we sent in there, how many of you looked up patent 7771736 and read it? No, hardly anybody. Well, read that sucker. Because right in there, we're complaining that we're running out of drugs for malaria and for gonorrhea. And the claim is right in there for malaria and gonorrhea. And because see, both those bugs have the shikimate pathway. And then what does the shikimate pathway do? It shuts down the synthesis of the aromatic amino acids. Phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan. Those are essential amino acids for us. And then most of the journals that I try to read the science from both sides. The agribusiness side tries to say, oh, we have plenty of those three essential, even though they're manufactured by our microbiome, if we don't have them in our diet, they're saying, oh, if it does affect the microbiome, it's only going to be for a short period of time because we've got plenty of them in all our diets. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true of all humans on this planet or all animals on this planet. And back to his graphs, I was a little worried at first because the U.S. looked too good. And it's because even though glyphosate is an antimicrobial, they never looked for it. That wasn't one of the, I want to make that clear to everybody out here. That wasn't one of the, that's not even on there. And I'm a little disgruntled with my fellow veterinarians because most of them don't want to listen to me when I talk about extra fusarium mycotoxins and toxico-infectious botulism. And yet I'm trying to defend them because Don said it, and he covered a lot of ground. We're using, I went to a meeting by the National Institutes of Animal Agriculture in Columbus, Ohio in 2012. It was a second annual meeting on antimicrobial resistance, and the whole meeting was 2 or 3 days devoted to environmental contamination. And my agronomist friend and I went, and we had all these excellent talks by people from the UN and doctors from all over talking about copper, because copper can change antimicrobial resistance. Not one of them knew about patent 7771736. So I've been trying ever since, to try to wake up people to that. Well, we're dumping it on millions of acres, blaming everything on livestock manure. And in 2012, we were already using, I think it was 3.5 times more of it on an active kilogram basis than we were all other antibiotics on livestock in all forms. So we got to talk about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if there's kind of one thing to think about and to take home as a lens through which to look at farming and these issues is that complexity is a good thing in farming. We want complex microbiomes. We want complex ecosystems. We have complex ecosystems. The world's complex. And when we try and solve problems by simplifying everything to one variable, when that's breeding herbicide resistance into a gigantic commodity crop so that one spray takes care of everything. If it's using antibiotics as a preventative that's used in the whole herd instead of treating individual sick animals. Those attempts to simplify things and eliminate the complexity that's there tend to have harmful consequences. And if we want to appreciate and deal with these complex systems in a complex way, a really key component of that is more caretakers. And so that's in opposition to the trend of consolidation, larger acreage being farmed by fewer people, and fewer farmers overall. That needs to be addressed as part of a solution to all of these issues. There needs to be more caretakers, more farmers who can deal with these problems on a acre to acre basis instead of a county to county basis, or an animal to animal basis instead of a herd to herd basis. So that would be my take home message, and I think that there can't just be regulations that mandate that says, okay, no more no more using this or no more using that. It has to be coupled with, there needs to be support in place to allow that caretaking to happen in a good way. So there needs to be more research into different approaches to different things for different circumstances. There needs to be support for new farmers and land affordability. I mean, it branches out into so many different things. It's a complex situation that requires complex angles of solutions.
I'd say following along with the complexity and antibiotic use, at Hermann's farm, we literally run, and stewardship is huge because that's really what we rely on most. But we run our sheep and our turkeys and our chickens almost completely together all through the season, especially the growing season. And what we find is that the manures are scratched into the ground. Parasites are eaten by turkeys or chickens from the sheep. They protect each other. They look out for each other. The birds keep their eyes on the skies. The sheep look like dogs, keep the coyotes at bay. It's very sort of Eden-like, but what we gain from that is really, really healthy organic food, and literally only if there's an injury do we ever really encounter any need for an antibiotic. We have a bottle of penicillin, but we never really use it. It sits in the refrigerator until it more or less expires. But recycling the nutrients, the vegetables, and really keeping the animals together. But again, it's about pasture and surface area. So we're lucky to have mixed forest and pasture for that. So, but with that, we want to let our consumers know what we do and keep that market local. So that's how we handle it.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments that we want to come back? Yeah, Art?
Can I add one comment, and that is, I kind of forgot about when I was going through it. Of all the cases that I see as a food animal veterinarian, 75% of them have a major factor, and that is nutrition. And if we get the nutrition right, we don't see the other problems. I tell my clients many times, if you could get your vitamin A right, I'd be out of business. And I leave that concept with you, because a number of us as veterinarians, there's always this thought that we're kind of pushing the antibiotics. I'm a veterinarian that hasn't sold an antibiotic since '92, and I've managed to make a living one way or another. Sometimes it was picking bottles, but yeah.
All right, so maybe time will be the time to open the floor a little bit. So yeah, I see how many hands there. So Roger, you had your hand first, so let's go there.
She's bringing a microphone.
So in the front and in the back.
Thank you. So I have a question about organic, which has been come up with, in the last panel, Lindsay Lesher-Shute said, organic is a good metric, and then she said there's another one called a biodynamic. And on this panel, it's interesting. I mean, Melinda, you said that in a way, because you don't think, I take what you said, and you tell me if I understood it, that organic is not really your metric of good beef or not. It has something a lot more complicated than that. So and you said, Ted, that 85% of antibiotics are used in large animals, but I take it that's an old stat that's going to be changed this year?
No, those are the stats that just came out
But I mean,
last year.
Okay, so I'm a little confused by that given the new law. But my question is this. There's different kind of consumers. So there's consumers who can pay for the kind of food you guys produce, and there's consumers who can't. So for the consumers who can pay for it and join CSAs and buy whole cows and choose their cuts and do that kind of thing, what are we looking for, right? Are we looking for organic? Are we looking for how do we make those decisions? But then there's the question of, for a lot of other people who can't either economically or time-wise make those choices, is organic a meaningful designation anymore? I mean, do we need to come up with a new one? And is it causing problems because it's preventing the use of antibiotics in order to get organic? I'm just wondering, is organic actually a useful idea right now to use institutionally and as a consumer or not? So that's where my question is.
Can I speak to that first? In that, in reality, and each of you can Google it, raising livestock with antibiotics is not economical venture. It's already, Arden had mentioned the benefits of organic over the price end of things. So I really want to dispel that idea that we can raise food-producing animals in Canada, and I think it's exactly the same in the US, more economically giving antibiotics than we can doing other ways. I really want to dispel that idea. We're not giving antibiotics to cheapen your food source.
Anyone else would like to answer this question as well?
I can give a really long, hard answer if people want to hear it. So it's really different for a small producer than a big producer, and some of the very large producers are hedging their bets. So there are companies that own many farms. They're not one big farm, but they own lots of smaller farms, and some of their farms are natural, and some of their farms are organic, and some of their farms are cage-free, and some of their farms. So they're trying to figure out which way the consumer dollar is going to go, and and some of them have farms in different states, and there are different state laws that apply. Most of them are trying to make a living producing food, realistically. And if we want to eat, we have to figure out a way for our farmers to be able to produce food and make money at it. I talked to a farmer in the room here who's farming now and can't afford the food that's being produced on the farm that he's working on. That's a problem. So we have to figure out a way for our farms to do really hard work that a lot of us would find unpleasant. And we have to figure out a way to reward them for it, and we have to figure out a way for their farming systems to work to produce healthy animals that are wholesome to eat. Most of the practices that we've come to know as being problematic didn't arise because somebody said, I want to feed antibiotics to cows. For example, corn is produced in the Midwest. Somebody thought it was a good idea to move the cows to the corn rather than to move the corn to the cows every day. And that's why we have feedlots in the Midwest. It wasn't because somebody said, I love the idea of feedlots. It's something that evolved over time. And if we're going to change it, We have to figure out a way to change it and to change the economics for the farm, and that's not going to happen overnight. And if you tried to shut down all the feedlots in the country, some people would starve. We can't forget Alistair's graphs, the pictures in particular. Those people in Bangladesh and China need to eat. This year, a third of the pigs in China are dead from an infectious disease. There's going to be a lot of hungry people in China. They're going to need to get their food from somewhere. They're going to be desperate. Revolutions start when people are hungry. We shouldn't forget that, and we should figure out ways to help our farmers. One of the things I think we need to do is go back to a robust system of agricultural research to help our farms. Our country right now is research averse and science averse, and we need to select policymakers who go in that direction.
I think that's a great point. I think I would like to bring the conversation maybe with the farmers to ask them, how do you make a decision if you go organic or not, or like which kind of appellation you go for, following from Belinda's point here?
Well, I think, for example, like Herman's farm, we're a pledged organic farm, but it's not a certified one. Taking a look at the guidelines, I'm sure that we would pass it. But I think sometimes you got to remember that, being certified organic is a government stamp. It's a federal stamp. It's from the USDA, which is important. But on a small farm where your contact is close and your methods are trusted and you know what you're doing and people really believe in you and and you believe in your farm, I don't know that the government needs to. I don't know. I mean, I think we would fly through it, but I don't know. To me, sometimes it just feels like it's like Uncle Sam says your practices are good, and I don't know if I need, we need that. When we pledge, we promise, we sign documents with our pledge. So,
and I'll just follow up and say, I think also as was mentioned, organic isn't an end-all be-all of a system or a certification. You could have an organic farm doing doing harmful things ecologically, or having terrible labor practices, or having non-ideal animal welfare practices. It's one consideration of many. In our case, we actually probably could get away without being certified organic because we have direct connections with pretty much all of our customers, selling directly to them, and that certainly is one of the best ways to know what you're getting. And it's a useful tool, certification. But there's definitely times when I have wondered, there's kind of this tipping point of people became very concerned about potential pesticides in their food, things like that, when the organic movement kind of grew up. And in some ways, I sometimes wonder, is organic as a movement just an easy way for people who have the means to feel comfortable about their food and ignore regulations on all the rest of agriculture and farm workers and things like that? So, are we in a better place because we have certified organic, and maybe all the people who really care about their food are spending their effort on, let's tweak the organic standards this way or that way, but forget about USDA regulations overall. So it's a question that I have, and I think in many ways the organic movement has led to a lot of progress and created some good change. But when it comes to, for example, microbiome and antibiotic use and things like that, with organic food you can, for example, or knowing your farm and knowing the farm worker practices, and you can know, if I support this farm, I know I'm supporting good practices with these ecologically, or I know that I can support. I know that I know that literally the farm workers who are working here, and I know that there's not exploitation happening that you might not know about in a tomato field in Florida. And so there's kind of a direct impact that you can have as a consumer with that. With antibiotic resistance, if you're buying from a farm that doesn't use antibiotics or only treats sick animals, that's great for yourself, but that's maybe not actually doing anything to prevent an antibiotic-resistant, problem from breaking out elsewhere, because you're only worrying about your farm, and this problem is much more widespread and requires not just you caring about your farm, but requires broad regulation and intervention, not just one piece at a time.
I think one of my favorite metrics for whether a farm is well managed, particularly a livestock farm, is if the farmer wouldn't mind like sitting out and having a glass of wine where their animals live. And I like ways of measuring things like that because it's easy for somebody to understand, yeah, this makes sense. Like if I was sitting out and I see animals, they're not screaming, they don't smell bad, they're not dirty, they're not running into each other. It's all of that is a really good indicator that you're managing the animals well. And like you don't want to hang out around a sick animal, and I'm sure you guys know most sick animals, people know that they're sick. You look at it, it's limping, it's coughing, there's a problem. And so I like thinking about ways of trying to communicate what good management looks like. That's one of the ones that I use. I think if you can afford it, and obviously not everybody can, the best thing you can do is go to farms visit the farms that you're buying food from and talk to the farmers. It will open your eyes both to what the effort is involved in producing the food that we produce, and also I think give you a really good appreciation of what the difference is between somebody who's managing a farm well and somebody who's not managing a farm well. So I think organic came out of a really good set of ideas that moved the needle forward for us. I don't think they're sufficient. There are some challenges, particularly around livestock, and I happen to know a little bit more around pigs because traditionally pigs are used to kind of pull off of feed opportunities that might sit outside of the traditional organic certification process. So as an example, my pigs eat used soil blocks for mushroom blocks from a local mushroom company, which has flaxseed in it. Flaxseed is incredible for the flavor and the meat quality of pigs, but they're not certified organic, so I couldn't use them if I wanted to have my pigs certified organic. So there's like lots of little funny things when you're talking to a farmer where you can be like, oh, this is how this really should work, but I can't go through the organic certification process to make it work for me in my context. So if you can afford to visit your farmer and talk to them about what they're doing, I think you'll find a lot that's really useful. And if you can't, then hopefully we over time find good metrics that other people can use that you can then that a broader population can take advantage of.
I think we have a scientific correlation here to quantify that wine metric in the future. That will be a publication coming up. If you don't mind, I will try to get a question. This question's been raised a little while ago.
Kevin, you mentioned in your biofish farming. You mentioned in your biofish farming. Yes. Can you share with us how to gauge and judge when we go into the market what's healthy and what's unhealthy, what's safe, what's not safe? I know shrimp from Thailand and that area are dangerous. I read about how they're raised. But how do we know? Almost everything. There's Norwegian farm-raised fish. There's Scottish farm-raised fish. How can we tell what's good and what's not good?
Yeah, that's a biggie. That's a real
big
one. I've spent quite a bit of time in Asia and touring it and seeing the farms over there. It was quite a while ago, but the antibiotic use they would just broadcast it, pink, just into the ponds, and the ponds were so dense with shrimp, and then they would break the ponds open to harvest the shrimp, and the water just goes down into the rice, and now the antibiotics are all in the rice, and then that water goes right down to the village for washing dishes. And
I read where the water then is frozen, sent here, and they don't even drink the water.
No.
The shrimp is sent to us in that.
Some of the better ways to look for really good fish is there are some really good guidelines.
That's what we need.
Yeah, there are. Trying to think of all of them. Maybe I can put them together for you when I can. There are some certifying agencies that are really, really good, and maybe I can put those together for you. But and also selecting from regions. Scotland's known for its really good wild fisheries. Alaska's got great wild fisheries still. The planet's not getting any bigger, and obviously we have problems with plastic and even radiation in Japan, and fish move around. Alaskan waters are beautiful, but the fish move to Japan, so it is getting trickier. Aquaculture practices are really trying to kind of catch up to those issues, and you can really find really good aquacultured fish that have taken great advantage of technology with biofiltration, so their impact on the environment is minimal compared to the amount of protein, calories, and food density per square foot, and great consideration to the feedstocks.
But how do we know when we go into the store?
I'm going to have to set you up at the better seafood guys.
There are, I think, like sustainableocean.org.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly
Seafood
the website, but
Watch.
we can try to maybe put it on the website or something afterwards as a resource for attendees afterwards.
Thank you.
There was a question also at the back, right behind.
Kyle, this one's coming for you. We've been talking all day about systems of systems or systems management, risk management, whatever you want to put your particular words on it. In my view, it's a system of systems with life cycles at the center. Everything's connected to everything else. So Kyle, you indicated that you were involved in business startups. Is that right? All right. That's a signal that I received that it's software related or hardware?
I've done mostly software, yeah.
All right, in my view, to share with the crowd, software development is a complicated system. There's different components, et cetera, but the humans you work with are relatively narrow-casted to people who work, if you were the owner, work for you and the people you sell to, okay? So kind of direct in and direct out, okay? There's financiers and everybody else there, don't worry about that, right. Okay? Now, you've moved from a complicated system into a complex system. And the difference is, in a complex system, there's many more independent moving parts. So when you receive from your feed supplier and the supplier of raw ingredients to your feed suppliers, there's lots of independent parts that are beyond your direct control. Are you with me?
I think so. Let's hit me with the question, and then maybe I'll understand it all.
Context before content is just pretext. So in your when you're experiencing the complicated versus the complex, the people you interact today with the complex systems, have you noticed any fundamental difference in the way the humans think, the way the humans decide, and the way the humans act or interact?
You mean between the software industry and the farming industry?
Yes.
I think people are all the same. Like, we all want similar things, and we're all trying to find the right way to do it. And so I haven't actually seen a huge difference between industries in terms of how people behave. What I think is really interesting, and maybe tries to address where your thinking heads, is that a lot of software development, the inputs and outputs are known and are very predictable. And with farming in general, you have a lot more opportunities for chaos to enter into the system.
There it is. Keep going.
And so, what you have to do, and this is actually also happening in the software industry, is you have to have approaches that and are effectively more robust. And so I think that's where this kind of conference is headed around the microbiome. Is what we're trying to do in general is find ways of increasing the robustness of all of the parts of a system so that we're more resilient, and that I think that works at the gut level, at the herd level, at the business level, for the farming industry, and but throughout society. Does that am I anywhere near where you're?
You're over the target.
Okay.
Let's get to the heart of it then, because of the way you can balance.
I feel like I'm back at college.
I know. It's the old white man in the room. I'm sorry. My point is, you're talking about negotiating between financial, logistical, analytical, biological, and social entities. How much have you expanded your negotiating skills in running your farm versus your tech business?
I think, my tech business, I did a lot of sales and I did a lot of management. And so I have a technical background. I've designed software, I've written it, but I ended up managing, 20, 30 people. And so my personal experience has been that a lot of the challenges, I think, for farmers are that they didn't run another type of business that was easier first. And so I came into farming, and I kind of was like, okay, this is how sales work. This is how you talk to people. This is what you have to do to manage the finances side of the business. And then the hard part for me was like, how do we figure out the production stuff? Which is actually, once you get that sorted out, sales and marketing pretty much is sales and marketing for just about anything else.
All right, thank you for your question. We have maybe a few questions here in the corner, so we can bring the microphone right here.
Thank you very much. What's fascinating about this discussion is the multiple industries involved. So I was wondering if you could address what do you see as the biggest systemic risk or challenge to what you do every day? If you had to pinpoint one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking which are the biggest risks to our industry?
And challenge to what you do, yeah.
And the biggest risk to our industry is what Dr. Thompson just talked about, is what happened in the swine industry in China, where they lost a third of their production to a virus. That virus wouldn't have been controlled with an antibiotic. And this is a thing where we need cooperation from every person in this room that's connected with eating or with raising livestock or a veterinarian. And that is, if something is not going quite right, to be letting somebody know. And that is, if you're a consumer and you have the control over the antibiotics, you're not going to flush them down the toilet, you know that now. But you have the control over all these things. And where I'm going on this is my wife and I had the opportunity to work in Britain during the foot and mouth outbreak. That was devastating to their economy. That is one of the biggest risks. That's one of the biggest risks I see for each farmer here, because all of a sudden we have a disease outbreak that we cannot control. They're devastated. You as a consumer will be devastated. There won't be any food on the shelf. That's my answer.
And I'd like to add to that is, there's been some talk that animals, if we support them, that they will remain healthy, and that with healthy microbiomes, disease doesn't happen. Yes and no. There are some contagious diseases that can overwhelm immune systems, and this one in particular is a good example. It's called African swine fever, and the reason it's called that is because it's kind of part of the microbiome of warthogs. And so it doesn't hurt the warthogs at all. So but commercial swine don't have the same evolution as warthogs, and their immune systems just can't handle it at all. And so when it was introduced into commercial swine accidentally, it's devastating. And so it's something our country's on the lookout for. China relies heavily on pork to feed their population. And China works a lot in countries where the disease is prevalent and somehow managed to get it back into their country, probably brought home pigs from Africa, best guess. But that's part of regulatory medicine, is to try to prevent those things from happening. It's, maybe something that could have helped Sandy Lewis keep anaplasmosis out of his cattle if the cattle he introduced had been appropriately tested to make sure that disease wasn't in those cattle. It's part of what we do as veterinarians from a preventive standpoint to try to make sure that antibiotics are needed. We try to prevent disease. And we use a lot of vaccines to try to prevent disease so that we keep animals robust and healthy, and and provide good nutrition and be good caretakers in general to try to help our colleagues stay in business.
Anyone wants to add something? Or maybe I think there was a question right just next to you, so maybe we can pass the microphone along.
I think at some point it's important to distinguish that food isn't fungible, and that food that's produced in one way, where there is no mismatch between the physiological needs of the animal or of the plant and the environment in which it's raised or grown, and an environment or a plant or an animal that is raised in a manner that is in a complete mismatch. And to equate the two as being food, I think, is both backward and certainly inappropriate to where we are now and what we're realizing. And so I'm wondering, given, for the farmers and everyone else on the panel, given what we know now about how many of our practices were either backwards or counterproductive to the evolutionary and physiological necessities of living organisms that we call food, and if we continue to call it food, we have to make sure it meets a certain criteria. If it doesn't meet that criteria, that's no longer food, that's poison. A sick plant is not something that we can eat without having side effects as a result. So the question is, what are the elements that you are each doing in your industries and your respective farms or practices that is taking in what we know today and the things that we learned just yesterday that could be completely counter to what you encountered previously in your industry and your profession, to advance what you're doing to make sure that you're at the forefront of your respective profession, and then teaching that to other farmers. Because if we're providing the food to so many, then we have a responsibility that, especially if we're here, we may know more simply just because of circumstance or deliberate effort about what's good and what's not. And if we're holding to any previous paradigms, then I think we're doing somebody else a disservice.
So one of the biggest innovations in livestock farming in the last 1,000 years is the electric fence. I'm not kidding. So because of what it allows us to do is manage to move fences very quickly and to set them up and take them down. And what that means is we can actually mimic the behavior of apex predators prior to large agriculture. And so what I do with my pigs is I have electric fences that basically move the pigs through my woods on a week or 2 week cycle, which means that the woods themselves have 50 weeks out of the year where they're recovering, right? And that is how apex predators moved large herds back before we were farming. One of my favorite numbers that I like to pull out is we actually had before Europeans came to the U.S., there were more bison in America than there are cows in America today, and also there was more almost every other animal, and we didn't have a carbon problem. And the reason was those bison would come in, trample everything for like 6 hours, and then there was no food left, so they had to move on. And by managing animals intensively the way Kevin and I are, actually you do the same thing with eggs, right? Yeah, everybody. The way all of us are doing this is basically trying to keep these guys moving and allowing the land to recover, avoiding keeping everybody's poop in one place for a long time and letting everything recycle. And I believe that like most of the younger farmers now kind of get this and are doing that. That is kind of a contravention of conventional agriculture where you keep the animal in one place and bring the food to it, which is what we were talking about.
Can I ask you what's the advantage of doing that?
Is it fair? Did somebody else want to answer? The biggest advantage is there's a bunch of them, but you reduce the risk of disease because animals aren't sitting in their own waste. You increase the soil carbon on the land because you're taking a bunch of green manure, turning it into green stuff, turning it into manure, letting it go into the ground, and slowly composting it and building your soil carbon, which I believe is what you were talking about earlier. And you're allowing the land to recover and regenerate and become better at storing water and nutrients.
May I say something? Yeah. Biodiversity is the key, and I don't want to blame my clients, they're my friends, or Midwest farming, but we've followed this soybean monoculture. We know biodiversity is the key for the microbiome. Biodiversity is the key to life. But everything we do, we want to have everything just be pure alfalfa with no grass in it, even though we know that little grass floating in the rumen feeds the rumen bugs better. So, and I know we're a capitalistic society, but I've been in Ryan, Iowa since 1974, since graduation with a classmate. And we used to be, practically everybody had cows and pigs. Well, now our dairy cows have disappeared, and we're in a real hilly, it's the little Switzerland, northeast Iowa, and really southeast Minnesota and southwest Wisconsin are the same. So what I agonize over is there's only so much milk you can market, and for some reason we've quit drinking milk, and one reason we did is we came down too hard on the fat business, and so. But anyway, I won't go there. We aren't making enough money, and our government program again, from the get-go, the farm policy. If I have a dairy client that plants small grains, oats, to get new seeding, and then has alfalfa, that counts against his corn base. So then he doesn't get as big a payment. And somehow we need to start rewarding these people if they raise their organic matter, if they've kept it up, because that's the next thing. If you put on anhydrous, sometimes it's not the animal manure, but a lot of my livestock clients I can't cut. Even though I got livestock clients that have cut way back on the amount of NPK they put on, I got others that put that on too. And if your organic matter is low, you can't hold nitrogen. So then you have Chesapeake Bay out here, and we have the Gulf, and so it's part of our dead zone. And there's what's happened in Wisconsin and in northeast Iowa and southeast Minnesota. Now we have all these big dairies between Milwaukee and up to Green Bay because of economies of scale with labor and a lot of other things. And I don't want to say they're all bad, but there's 2 counties in northern Wisconsin up by Green Bay that are on a karst like I am, so we have fissured lime rock and next to no subsoil. We're already, even in our dairy magazines, in Progressive Dairy, they were already talking about the water being contaminated with salmonella and E. coli that they can say is from these dairies, and that aquifer goes under Lake Michigan into the upper peninsula of Michigan and into Ontario. So there's certain things we're doing that I don't know how we fix it as a capitalistic society, but by the same token, when you have all your manure in one place, you got to figure out how to spread it. He mentioned the manure plans, but you got to find somebody to haul it to and whatnot. It starts to become a liability instead of an asset.
I just wanted to touch quickly on the electric fencing because I love them as well, and they really do. They do spread the footprint. It's really good for the environment to keep those animals moving that way, and that modeling of the apex predator is exactly spot on. But one of the other nice things that it does is, getting back to like relationships with consumers, the animals grow normally. So they're storing fat interstitially, they're growing, their structure is much more sound. So your animals are just, you taste the health if you eat meat or you're a carnivore. Your birds pick up pigments, the colors of the meat changes, the layering of a pig's fat changes. It becomes natural, and you start to really pick up flavors that you may think, oh, I have to go to Europe, to taste things like this, or I have to go somewhere exotic, where you really don't have to if you're working with farms that work in those models where the pigs are on pasture and then they're on nuts, and then you move them in the fall and you bring them back, and your poultry's doing the same thing. Your birds, your turkeys, your eggs, your egg production, everything that you're doing is moving around. So if you have even a small farm, if you have those ecosystems and fencing like that, it's maybe not as big of a point, but you really get to taste better food, and it gives you a better sense of organic methodology. It doesn't have to be a certification, which takes you right back to preserving the microbiome within the animal and within your environment in your soil. So
There's a woman over here in a yellow shirt who's had her hand up the whole time, and nobody ever takes her the microphone.
Thanks for pointing out. It was right at my dead angle.
I just have a general question. I was wondering, what are some practices that small farms can use to increase their soil's ability to sequester carbon? We've been talking about like moving fences, and I just want to hear some like practices that we can really like put into play here. And I was also wondering how large of an impact that would be able to have if small farms started to sequester carbon.
I want big farms to do it too. Regrettably, we have 4 firms now that own over 60% of the seeds in the world. And here we know we need more agroecology in place of some of the agrochemistry we're using, and yet all 4 of those firms are chemical firms. So we're having success in our practice. I've had a lot of clients that have listened, or they were probably on, I'm not giving myself all the credit at all, but as I mentioned, you buy your seed corn from Herman's Hybrids in our practice, or from Gilbert Hostetler, or somebody, you say the heck if Monsanto Bayer or DuPont, Dow, Corteva, or Chem China, Syngenta, or BASF, if they aren't going to provide us non-GMO, we actually, in our practice area, I'm blessed, Dr. Bob Kremer, who's done a lot of work showing how glyphosate as an antimicrobial promotes the Fusarium graminearum mold family. So as a swine veterinarian, I have to deal with all these mycotoxins, and the line just keeps kind of creeping up, and it's not all this herbicide. Part of it is just continuous corn, no crop rotation, not managing your soil ecology. That's what a farmer's supposed to do. Anyway, he got a SAR grant. I probably shouldn't even talk about it because I don't want him pestered. I ended up writing some stuff, and I said, Bob, you're never going to get it, because he got this SARE grant, Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education grant, with one of the landlords in our practice who switched to a client that's using non-GMO corn to show that they can raise the soil organic matter faster in that situation than with it. And we need lots more of that sort of thing. And yeah, I think maybe we already said that. See, we're spending, back when we went to the moon, we were spending 2% of our tax dollars on federal research, and now it's less than 0.7%.
I'll just add to that. I mean, there's very proven ways of small or large farms increasing carbon in the soil through cover cropping, through animal rotation practices, and federal policy has big impacts on how farmers, large and small, make choices, especially large, in terms of what they incentivize, if it's corn production or if it's resource conservation and things like that. And there are some programs in USDA that incentivize more cover cropping and more kind of carbon-friendly farming, and they can be strengthened and improved, and that will have a very measurable impact in the choices that farmers make, whether they take certain fields out of production, whether they plant cover crops in certain things, and those are real impacts that can be had based on policy.
So I'm going to be talking in a little bit about the human microbiome aspects of things, but one thing I just want to echo that I thought was fantastic was this idea of complexity. That we can't change the microbiome is naive, right? We have no idea what a real microbiome is defined by. What is a healthy microbiome, whether it be in the environment or not? We impact the microbiome by just being there. One thing that I like about this idea of complexity is keeping things moving, right? Diversifying things and not sort of settling on one simple answer. And when I hear a lot of the things, which is totally new to me, and this has been a fantastic panel, the use of these types of toxins, it sounds like you're simplifying a process. And what I wondered the whole time is, well, why did we do this? And part of it, for me, always comes back to, when I started my lab, I always thought the most expensive thing was I was going to have to sequence all this crap and spend all this money on materials. But that's actually couldn't be further from the truth. The most expensive thing is labor. And so one question I have for the group here is how much, it comes back also to this organic question, which I thought was wonderful. How much of this you really think is driven, and I know this is an economics institute, by the costs of labor and really paying people a living wage and then being economical and cutting corners and other aspects to reduce those costs by sort of driving people off? And do you think that may be one of the bigger challenges we're facing in this model in terms of getting to where we want to be? Because I also agree with the statement made that most people are good. Most people want to practice well, but it comes down to sort of capitalism and whatnot. So I'll leave that out to the group.
I was going to avoid this, but a book I'd recommend is called The Chain, and it's happens to be Hormel in Fremont, Nebraska. But my conventional clients, and most of them are conventional, if you think what Upton Sinclair wrote about in 1906 was bad, look at the problem now, because we've tremendously increased the line speed. We've told the people in the plant in 1984 in Hormel in Fremont, Nebraska, mainly Caucasian workers, and the wife could stay home and take care of the kids, and they got paid better than people working at John Deere because they knew packing house work was tough. Well, that was 200 hogs an hour. And then we came up with HACCP, which I'm not saying is all bad. We've got more culture techniques and stuff. That's hazard analysis, critical control points. So we took the inspectors out of there that had to look at every carcass and maybe touch some lymph nodes and tell you it was okay. Well, now we're doing a better job with pork quality assurance and making sure we do a better job on the farm, and then we're doing this culture technique. So now the line speed is I don't even want to believe it, but this is a farm boy from Fremont, and he's an investigative reporter. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, it's 2,000. So it's 33 pigs a minute. So the only people that can get to work there are illegal aliens and Mexicans and Guatemalans and Bosnians, and their turnover rate's 45% a year, and the whites in the town don't like them because they think they stole their jobs, so they live in Schuyler, Nebraska, 60 miles away, and have to drive their beat-up cars to get there. And then we go to the store and we buy Spam, So it's and the organic system. It's Jeff Bezos from Amazon bought Whole Foods in August of 2017. And when he did that, since my son and daughter-in-law are MOSA certified organic farmers, MOSA certification is different than USDA certification. You got to make your own compost. You can't buy it from a big chicken operation or dairy. So when it comes to glyphosate, there's just as much in that whole food stuff. But anyway, Jeff Bezos said all these millennials want to eat food that doesn't have chemicals in it. So I'm not going to take into the consideration that it takes more labor and it costs more. I'm just going to sell it to them for the same price. So a bunch of kale in early August of 2017 that he got $1.17 a bunch, it went to 72 cents, and everything did that. So New Pioneer Co-op in Iowa City, their gross went down 35%. And yeah, so there's a lot of things that get, know your farmer. Yeah.
If I can comment on that, we have a number of producers, and some of you will know producers, that a while ago somebody was talking about checking all the manure samples. We have producers that just watch the manure of their pigs or the manure of their cattle to see what the microbiome is doing. Producers are onto this, and they know that if that manure is showing that it's well digested and there's no abnormalities, things are going well. And this is a big labor saver. Many of these people are on top of this kind of thing.
And we've made some inroads on reducing some of the difficult chores. So there are now robotic milking machines that milk cows. I don't know how many of you have ever gotten up at 4 o'clock in the morning, every day to milk cows, but farmers say that they even have to milk the cows after they die. That's one of the things. And there's a lot of dairy farmers that retire to some other farming because they think that's easier. So now we have robotic milking machines. That's a good thing if the milk quality is good and if it doesn't hurt the cows and the cow welfare is good. If that farmer can then pay better attention to the cow health. So if we can figure out ways to reduce the tedium, there are tractors now that are completely controlled by GPS devices and don't have drivers in them in some cases. That's not necessarily a bad thing if it allows that farmer to pay attention to some other aspects of the work and keeps them from having to hire illegal immigrants to do their work. But we need to think hard as a society about why our tomatoes are being picked by illegal immigrants and why our cows are being milked by Guatemalans and why Americans don't even want those jobs. To me, we need to look at the whole system. I agree. This is a very complex system, and there's a lot of difficult questions that we need to deal with, and One Health doesn't even touch it, even though you and I are on the same page about One Health. And we're worried. I'm worried that One Health goes one way, that from the veterinary perspective, we feel like we've been on board with this, and we don't feel like it's coming back in the other direction.
Just want to say one thing about the value of people and their time. There's a woman who works for Fur Trail. It's a company that does organic fertilizers and mineral supplements for animals and feed. And she'll give a talk about animal management and managing small farms. And she'll hold up a thing of breath mints, and she'll say, this is the most important tool in your toolbox as a livestock farmer. Go with your animals, put one of these in your mouth, and just wait there until it's dissolved, observing your animals. And that is the most important investment you can make that day in figuring out, like, what do these animals need? What does my operation need? She'll always say that's the most important tool in your toolbox, is taking the time out of your day, even though you're busy, even though everything you're doing is a chore and things like that, to make those observations and to have that care directed at your flock and figuring out what's going on with it.
I agree. I just recommend a glass of wine.
Right, so we'll take 3 questions. We had one student here with their hand up. 3 questions all at once, and then we're going to try to conclude together here as the panel, okay? So Hannah, you can start with your question.
Okay, so I just wanted to start. We've been talking a lot about the consumer side of organic and how a lot of smaller farms can't reach those regulations to get that certification. And I really loved, especially from a consumer side, the wine analogy. I thought that was awesome. I love that, but I think when we talk more about the regulatory side of things, we do need some form of certification or some metric, some system, and it can't just be having a glass of wine with every farmer, because there's a lot of different foods that we're all eating. So I kind of just want to hear from you guys what you consider, I guess how you would redefine on a regulatory stance organic, if you have a different term that you would use. I've heard biodynamic thrown around a little bit. how you'd redefine it and how you would change like current rules to fit it better so that it's more inclusive, particularly of small like farmers who can't really reach those.
Let's have a second question as well. You can move here. Yeah.
Those of you who raise livestock, do you follow your caretaking through to the way the animal is slaughtered? Is that important? And I live in a town, I don't want to say the name and I don't want to say the market, but they claim that they put their cattle to sleep in CO2 chambers. But does it make a difference to you because you care about them?
I just wanted to make the comment back a little bit from the previous speaker concerning this, that he was saying, where does your poop go? I wanted to say dilution is the solution, which happens with small guys like you guys up there, all right? When you were talking about how the poultry followed the sheep. The other comment is that you talked about small farms and that you need to know your farmer, which I agree with. However, in our society, that only takes a very small percentage of the population. How do we get more people to know their small farmers?
All right, so the table is open.
I'll try to hit it quick. The first question, what would you change regulations-wise? A lot of regulations are process-oriented, and if you change them to outcomes-oriented, that would make a big difference. So, for example, with poultry processing, it's like you have to dump it into a vat of chlorinated solution or some kind of sanitizer for a certain amount of time. Whereas what we really want to be doing is measuring what's the risk of certain bacteria on the actual carcass at the end of the process. That would open up a lot of opportunities for small scale, particularly slaughterhouses, to be more effective. That also goes to your second question, which was, do I care about how my animals die? 100%. I've spent an inordinate amount of my time figuring out what are the best slaughterhouses and working with them to get the best process in place, including slaughtering my own animals, so that I understand how the whole process.
Regarding whether or not there are good reasons to have standards and regulations regarding how do you talk about organic certification. Regionally, New York has NOFA. New England has some great regional organic regulations and measures and guidelines. So I actually prefer to work regionally. I actually think they keep better track of us. I think that they know us better. I think that you can reach out to them better rather than a big blanket government certification agency. And regarding the animal welfare, I'm calling it welfare, but taking the animal to the slaughterhouse, 100%, every time, every step.
I would add as a veterinarian that most of us are very concerned about animal welfare and about the welfare of the animals completely through to the slaughter end, and we would like to assure that that's done in the absolute best way possible. Regarding regulations and certification, my hope before I die is that all we have to worry about is that our food is safe, and that safe means all of this that we've been talking about, and that we are not talking about a food system that's tiered by what you can afford. We should believe that all our food is safe, and we need to come to a point where we trust our regulatory agencies fully and our policymakers fully, and we need to select our policymakers with transparency and honesty in mind. I do still believe that the United States has the safest food collectively, including maybe some of the food that those of us in the room even cringe about is probably safer than food in other countries. But certainly the organic movement has driven a lot of the decisions that have been made. I credit it for the decision to limit the antibiotics that are being used in livestock, for sure. But someday I would like to think that rich people and poor people in this country are eating food that's equally safe. And that should be the goal.
Well, I think it's a perfect way to end. Please join me again and thank our panelists. And I think I hope there's one take home from this panel is that things are changing and changing quickly almost on a yearly basis. So you have to keep reading and stay informed. All right?
Thank you. And thanks to the panel. This was great. We're going to take about a 25-minute break and reconvene at 4. And we will open some windows and get some air in here. So thank you all, and we'll see you at 4 o'clock.